Senator, nice to see you, sir.
Hey, good to be here.
You are calling for a formal declaration of war against ISIS. Why?
Our founding fathers were very clear that you don't go to war without the authority of Congress. In fact, I think the most important responsibility we have in serving in Congress is to deliberate over going to war. I can't think of anything more important, and the president's basically doing it on his own. This isn't the first thing the president's decided to go on his own, but this is pretty important, and so we've introduced a declaration of war which would give the constitutional imprimatur to going to war. He should have done it 5 months ago, but even now we're going to try to force him to live by the rules of Congress.
All right, the Constitution says that the Congress has the authority to declare war. That's clear. Correct. It's Article 1, Section 8. The president claims that he has authority under two things. One is the 2001 authorization passed after the 9/11 attacks that President Bush used, and the 2002 authorization sought by President George Bush for the Iraq War. That he says that he's doing it lawfully under those two.
Both of those, I'd say, would be absurd contentions. Basically, in 2001, we voted for an authorization that said the people who attacked us on 9/11, that we would go after them. Well, this group wasn't in existence then, and this group isn't even allied with al-Qaeda. This group is at odds with al-Qaeda. So I think it's absurd. I told John Kerry that when he came before our committee, that it's absurd to try to say a linkage to a war started 15 years ago against the people who attacked us on 9/11. Now, I am for doing something against ISIS. I just think we ought to do the right thing constitutionally and vote on it. My declaration of war also limits this in the sense that I don't want ground troops back there. I think the troops on the ground ought to be the people who live there. And it also says that within 1 year it expires, so we would have to vote again. I don't want perpetual war, and that's what we've had for the last 15 years is war without end. I think the war would have to be renewed if we want to go on beyond a year.
Is President Obama acting unlawfully now if you say that those two prior provisions are ridiculous or don't apply?
Yes, absolutely. I think he has no statutory authority and no constitutional authority. The Constitution, I think, would allow, and most people say, for the repelling of an imminent attack. But once an attack goes on for months and months and you're actually not defending anything, you're actually going out and offensively trying to either conquer territory or conquer an opponent, I don't think that's a defensive maneuver, nor is that temporary or an imminent attack. That is something that ought to be contemplated by Congress.
What did Secretary Kerry say?
He said, which I think is absurd, he said, well, yeah, if 2001 doesn't do it, the president has Article 2 authority to do whatever he wants. I disagree with that. I think most constitutional scholars do. And I think most people in the American public do not think the president has unlimited power to go to war.
What's the appetite among your colleagues in the U.S. Senate? Do you have any Democrats, first of all?
It's actually something that actually doesn't split neatly along party lines. I would say there's as many Democrats as Republicans, or probably more Democrats than Republicans that actually agree with me on this. Republicans are good if it has to do with immigration or Obamacare. They say, oh, the president can't do things by himself. But when it comes to war, some Republicans will say, oh, no, the president, no matter who he is, can do whatever he wants. So some Republicans agree with John Kerry. Unlimited power to the presidency for war. I think in every area, immigration, Obamacare, and war, that the Constitution limited the president's powers.
Well, it's sort of interesting. There's been sort of a slippery slope with the Constitution over the past, 10, 15 years. I mean, even if you look at, you and I think probably agree that that for NSA should get a warrant if it's going to seize records. I mean, people are sort of thinking that the Constitution is just some sort of silly piece of paper.
Yeah, and it's amazing that these things were written over 200 years ago, and still they apply to today. The Fourth Amendment on making sure your records were secure was written because they didn't like the British soldiers having general warrants with nobody's name on it and going into your house and taking your papers. And so we really try to prevent this from happening, and it still applies today. The only difference is your papers are somehow digitalized, and sometimes other people hold your papers for you. But I don't think you relinquish a privacy interest if I let the phone company hold my records. I think those are still mine. They can't share them with my neighbor, so they shouldn't share them with the government.
All right, let me turn to a trip that you took about a month ago to Ferguson, Missouri. Why did you go?
Because I think that I wanted to further understand what's going on, not just in Ferguson, but in a lot of our major cities. What I sense is there's sort of an undercurrent of unease out there, that people are unhappy because of poverty, they're unhappy because of unemployment, but they're also unhappy because criminal justice system, I think, seems to have trapped people, particularly people of color, African Americans, Hispanics, are disproportionately represented in our prisons for nonviolent drug crimes. And I think because of that, there's this sense of, I'm not being treated fairly. There's a sense of anger. You see what's going on, and none of it do I condone any of what's going on in Ferguson, the violence. In fact, I was there. I suggested put out a voter registration table. I'll come help you man the table because I want more people to vote. And I think it's a way of getting people to participate. But at the same time, there is an anger out there, and we ought to understand what the anger is about. Doesn't mean we condone it, but we need to understand, is there a way to make our legal system better? A good example is in Ferguson last year, there were $2 million in petty fines. For you or I, a $100 fine might not be a big deal, but if you're poor and you have a $100 fine, then you don't pay it, and then next week it's $125, then it's $150, then it's $200. You can see how these petty fines build up, and there's an anger build up towards authorities because they're getting nickeled and dimed to death by these petty fines.
Whose fault is it? I mean, when you went to Ferguson, you met with NAACP, met with African American leaders in the community, pastors. Whose fault? Who's this, or how did we get here?
Well, the interesting thing is when you meet with the leaders of the community, obviously none of them want violence. In fact, many of the businesses that have been burned are owned by minority business owners. So are these people from outside? Does it get out of control? But the bottom line is I think we need to do something differently. And here's the problem. Some of this laws can't do. One of the things I think that needs to happen, and I can't make it happen, if you look at the #1 cause of poverty, and this is not just the black population, if you look just at the white population, #1 cause of poverty, having kids before you're married and not finishing your education. Those two things put you in this category. If you finish your education and you wait to have your children, you're in this category. Way different, like 4 times better chance of staying out of poverty, maybe 10 times better. But someone needs to talk about that. And there needs to be leaders, instead of leaders inciting violence, they need to be saying, come on, guys, you want to get ahead, you want to have a job. You got to wait to have your kids. But this isn't just a black thing. I want to make sure people aren't thinking, oh, this is a racial thing. This happens in white communities. It's happening across culture for the last 30 or 40 years.
What do you think of what President Obama said last night?
I think he was exhorting people to keep the peace, but meanwhile there were bombs and explosions going on simultaneously. I don't think he wants any of this either. I think there are a lot of people who don't want this but don't quite understand why it has to happen.
So is he doing the right thing, though? I mean, is it enough to come out and make a statement?
I don't know. We were commenting just a few minutes ago, what would you do if you wanted to make it differently? I would have set up a voter registration table last night if I were there and I were one of the black leaders in the community and said, all right, don't go out and do anything. Let's sit down here and register votes. Let's see if we can get 10,000 people to register to vote today. Then basically you're in charge. Then it's your city.
Then you get to vote and see what you want.
Absolutely.
Senator, nice to see you, sir.
Thank you.